She'll be gone soon. Those 4 words hit me like ice water in July. The voice belonged to my daughter-in-law, Sarah, and it sliced through the thin bathroom walls of my Chicago apartment like a knife through tissue paper. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. I was standing there in my small shower, water cascading down my 72-year-old body, when those words froze me in place. The lavender shampoo I'd been massaging into my gray hair suddenly felt heavy in my hands. My heart dropped so fast I thought it might crash through the bathroom floor into Mrs. Chen's apartment below. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The steam around me felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in. My name is Eleanor, but everyone calls me Ellie. I've lived in this same 1-bedroom apartment on the north side of Chicago for 38 years. The building is old, with creaky floors and paper-thin walls that let you hear everything your neighbors are doing. The radiator clanks in winter, and the air conditioner barely works in summer. But it's home. Or at least, it was supposed to be. That morning started like every other morning for the past 5 years since my husband Frank passed. I woke up at 6:30, made myself a cup of coffee in the same blue ceramic mug Frank bought me for our 20th anniversary, and sat by the window watching the early commuters hurry down Lincoln Avenue. The autumn leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the street in shades of amber and gold that reminded me of happier times. I'd been living alone since Frank died, but lately, my son Michael and his wife Sarah had been visiting more often. At first, I was thrilled. Finally, I thought, we're becoming a real family again. But their visits always seemed to come with requests. Money for the mortgage. Help with the kids. Could I babysit? Could I lend them my car? Could I? That particular Wednesday morning, I'd sent Michael a text message around 9 o'clock, asking if they wanted to come for dinner on Sunday. I was planning to make his favorite pot roast, the one with carrots and potatoes that he used to beg me for when he was little. I waited for a response, checking my phone every few minutes like a teenager waiting for her crush to call back. Nothing. By noon, I decided to take a shower and maybe treat myself to lunch at that little diner on Diversey. That's when I heard them. Michael and Sarah were in my living room, their voices carrying perfectly through the bathroom door. They must have used the spare key I'd given them for emergencies. The lawyer said it could take months, Michael was saying, his voice lower than usual. Good, Sarah replied, and I could picture her crossing her arms the way she always did when she was being stubborn. She'll be gone soon anyway. Then we won't have to deal with this anymore. I pressed my back against the cold tile wall, water still running, soap stinging my eyes. Gone soon? What did that mean? Was I sick and nobody told me? Were they planning to put me in a nursing home? The questions swirled in my mind like the drain water at my feet. Sarah, don't talk like that, Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. Like what? Like it's true? She's 72, Michael. How much longer do you think she has? And this place? I heard footsteps, probably Sarah walking around my living room, critiquing everything I'd carefully arranged over the decades. This place could be worth $200,000, maybe more. We could pay off the house, maybe even buy that cabin in Wisconsin you're always talking about. My hands started shaking. I had to grip the shower handle to keep from falling. They were talking about my death like it was a business transaction. Like I was already gone. Besides, Sarah continued, she hardly leaves this apartment anymore. She's practically a hermit. We'd be doing her a favor getting her into one of those nice facilities. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw open that bathroom door and demand to know how they could be so cruel. But I couldn't move. I just stood there, letting the hot water wash away my tears as fast as they fell. You see, this wasn't the first time I'd overheard conversations that weren't meant for my ears. But it was the first time the words had cut this deep. For 5 years, I'd been trying so hard to be the perfect mother, the perfect grandmother, the perfect widow who didn't complain or ask for too much. I'd been invisible for so long that maybe they'd forgotten I was still a human being with feelings. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the front door close. They'd left without even saying goodbye, without even acknowledging I was there. I turned off the shower and wrapped myself in the same threadbare towel I'd been using for 10 years. Everything in my apartment suddenly looked different. The family photos on the mantel seemed to mock me. The cozy furniture I'd preserved so carefully felt like a museum exhibit. I sat on the edge of my bed, still wrapped in that towel, and looked at myself in the mirror across the room. When had I become this person? When had I become someone whose death was eagerly anticipated by her own family? Let me tell you about the woman I used to be, before grief and loneliness wore me down to almost nothing. I was Eleanor McGrath, born and raised on the south side of Chicago. I met Frank when I was 23, working as a secretary at a law firm downtown. He was a postal worker with the biggest smile I'd ever seen and hands that could fix anything. We got married in 1975 at St. Alphonsus Church, the same church where I'd been baptized. Michael was born 2 years later, and for 18 wonderful years, our little family felt complete. Frank would come home every evening with stories from his mail route, and I'd have dinner waiting on the table. Michael was a good boy, smart in school, played baseball in Wicker Park. We weren't rich, but we were happy. When Michael graduated high school, he got a scholarship to Northern Illinois University. Frank and I were so proud we couldn't stop talking about it. Our son, the first person in either of our families to go to college. But college changed him. He came home less and less. When he did visit, he seemed embarrassed by our small apartment, by Frank's postal uniform, by my simple way of talking. He met Sarah during his junior year. She came from money, from a family with a big house in Naperville and parents who owned a successful accounting firm. When Michael brought her home for the first time, I tried so hard to make a good impression. I spent all day cleaning and cooking, bought new dishes I couldn't really afford. But Sarah barely touched her food and kept checking her phone throughout dinner. After they left that night, Frank put his arm around me and said, "Don't worry, Ellie. She'll come around. Sometimes it takes time for people to see what a treasure you are." But Frank was wrong. Sarah never came around. And after we lost Frank to a heart attack 5 years ago, things only got worse. The day of Frank's funeral, I remember standing by his casket in my black dress, the one I'd worn to maybe 3 formal events in my entire life. Michael was there with Sarah and their twin boys, Tommy and Jake, who were 7 at the time. I kept hoping someone would stay with me afterward, help me figure out how to live in a world without Frank. But everyone went home to their own lives, and I went home to silence. That's when the requests started. First, it was small things. Could I babysit the boys while Michael and Sarah went to a work dinner? Of course, I said. I was grateful to have something to do, someone who needed me. Then it was bigger things. Could I help with their mortgage payment? They'd had some unexpected expenses, Sarah explained, and they were just a little short this month. I said yes because I wanted to help. Because I wanted to be needed. Because in my grief-clouded thinking, I believed that saying yes would bring them closer to me. But saying yes only led to more requests. $200 became $500. $500 became $1,000. Before I knew it, I'd loaned them nearly $15,000 from Frank's life insurance money. Money he'd meant to secure my future, to make sure I'd be taken care of. Every time I handed over another check, they promised it was the last time. Every time, Sarah would hug me and call me the best mother-in-law in the world. Every time, I believed them. The babysitting requests came more frequently too. Not just for dinner dates anymore, but whole weekends. Michael and Sarah needed to go to conferences, they said. Or Sarah's mother was sick and they needed to drive to Naperville. Always something urgent, always something that meant I couldn't make my own plans. Not that I had many plans to make. My social circle had shrunk considerably after Frank died. Most of our friends were couples, and suddenly I was the fifth wheel nobody knew how to include anymore. I'd tried joining a book club at the library, but I felt so out of place among all those articulate women who seemed to understand literary symbolism that went right over my head. So I said yes to babysitting because at least when Tommy and Jake were with me, the apartment felt alive again. They'd race around my small living room, play with the old toys I'd saved from when Michael was little, and ask me to tell them stories about their grandmother and grandfather, about the family they were part of but barely knew. But even the babysitting started feeling different after a while. Michael and Sarah would drop the boys off with barely a hello, rushing off to whatever was more important than spending time with me. They'd return hours later than promised, sometimes forgetting to call, leaving me wondering if something had happened to them or if they'd simply forgotten about me altogether. The boys would fall asleep on my couch, and I'd cover them with the same blankets I'd used to tuck Michael in when he was their age. Looking at their sleeping faces, I could see so much of Frank in them, so much of the son I'd raised and loved. But I also felt a growing sadness, a recognition that these moments were borrowed time, that I was being used rather than loved. The breaking point came last Christmas, though I didn't recognize it as a breaking point at the time. I'd spent weeks preparing for our celebration. I decorated the apartment with every ornament Frank and I had collected over the years. I bought presents for Michael, Sarah, and the boys, spending money I didn't really have because I wanted everything to be perfect. I planned Christmas dinner down to the last detail, Frank's favorite recipes that had made our home smell like love for so many years. Christmas Eve arrived, and I waited. And waited. At 7 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom, I'm sorry, but we can't make it tonight. Sarah's parents invited us for dinner, and you know how important that is for her career." "But what about tomorrow?" I asked, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. "Tomorrow's going to be tough too. The boys have plans with their friends, and we promised Sarah's sister we'd stop by. Maybe we can see you next week?" I hung up the phone and looked around my perfectly decorated apartment. The tree lights blurred as tears filled my eyes. I'd spent Christmas alone, eating a TV dinner while surrounded by all the preparations I'd made for a family that had chosen to be somewhere else. That night, I took down all the decorations and put them away. I told myself I was being practical, getting a head start on cleaning up. But really, I was trying to erase the evidence of my foolishness, my naive belief that I mattered enough to be included. By New Year's Eve, I'd made a resolution. I was going to stop expecting so much. I was going to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention my family could spare. I was going to be the easy, uncomplaining mother and grandmother who never caused problems or made demands. And for the most part, I kept that resolution. When Michael called asking for money, I said yes without asking questions. When Sarah needed me to babysit on short notice, I canceled my own plans. When they forgot my birthday in March, I didn't mention it. When Mother's Day came and went without acknowledgement, I told myself it didn't matter. I became smaller and smaller, quieter and quieter, until I was practically invisible in my own life. The morning I overheard that conversation in the shower was a Wednesday in early October. The leaves outside my window were turning the colors of fire, and the air had that crisp bite that meant winter wasn't far away. I'd been living this diminished life for so long that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to want more. After Michael and Sarah left that morning, I sat in my living room for hours, still wearing my bathrobe, still smelling faintly of lavender shampoo. I looked at the photographs on my mantle, decades of memories captured in cheap frames from Woolworths. There was my wedding photo, Frank and me looking so young and hopeful. There was Michael's high school graduation, his face shining with possibility. There was a family photo from the boys' 5th birthday party, all of us crowded around a Spider-Man cake in my kitchen. In every photo, I was smiling. But looking at them now, I could see something else in my expression, something I'd never noticed before. I looked tired. Even in the happy moments, even when I was surrounded by family, there was a weariness in my eyes that spoke to something deeper than physical exhaustion. I realized I'd been tired for years. Tired of trying so hard to earn love that should have been freely given. Tired of making myself smaller so others could feel bigger. Tired of being grateful for crumbs when I deserved the whole meal. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I got dressed in real clothes, not just the comfortable sweats and oversized sweaters that had become my daily uniform. I put on the blue dress Frank had always said brought out my eyes, the one that had been hanging unworn in my closet since his funeral. I brushed my hair and even put on a little lipstick. Then I walked to the Starbucks on the corner of Lincoln and Fullerton. It was something I'd wanted to do so many times, but I'd always talked myself out of it. Too expensive, I'd think. Too crowded. Too full of young people who'd wonder what an old woman like me was doing there. But that day, I didn't care about any of that. I ordered a medium coffee with cream, no sugar, and found a small table by the window. I watched the pedestrians hurrying by, each of them carrying their own stories, their own struggles and joys. For the first time in years, I felt like I was part of the world instead of just watching it from behind my apartment windows. While I sat there, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, "Can you watch the boys Friday night? Big client dinner. Really important." I stared at the message for a long time. Usually, I would have texted back immediately with an enthusiastic yes, grateful to be needed, happy to help. But sitting in that coffee shop, surrounded by the gentle hum of conversation and the hiss of espresso machines, something felt different. I typed back, "I'll let you know." It was a small rebellion, but it felt enormous. I'd never made them wait for an answer before. I'd never suggested that my time might be valuable too, that I might have plans or preferences of my own. The next day, I did something even more extraordinary. I called the Chicago Public Library and signed up for that book club I'd been too intimidated to join before. The librarian, a kind woman named Janet, told me they were reading The Joy Luck Club and that I was welcome to join them the following Tuesday evening. "Don't worry if you haven't read it yet," she said. "We all learn from each other. That's the whole point." For the first time in years, I had something to look forward to that had nothing to do with my family's needs or demands. Friday came, and I still hadn't responded to Sarah's text about babysitting. My phone had been buzzing all week with increasingly urgent messages. First from Sarah, then from Michael, asking if I was okay, if I'd gotten the message, if something was wrong. Around noon on Friday, Sarah called. "Ellie? Did you get my texts? We really need you tonight. This dinner could change everything for Michael's career." I could hear the irritation in her voice, barely concealed beneath a thin layer of politeness. "I got your messages," I said calmly. "But I can't babysit tonight. I have plans." There was a long pause. "Plans? What plans?" The question stung, the implication clear. What could someone like me possibly have planned? What could be important enough to interfere with their needs? "I'm going to a book club meeting," I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "A book club?" Sarah's tone was incredulous. "Ellie, this is really important. Can't you read books another time?" No, I said, and the word felt foreign in my mouth. I can't. Another pause, longer this time. Then, fine. I guess we'll have to find another babysitter. Thanks a lot. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there holding the phone, waiting for guilt to wash over me, waiting to feel terrible about letting them down. But instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: pride. I'd stood up for myself, for my own plans, for my own worth. That Tuesday evening, I walked to the library branch on Fullerton Avenue. My hands were shaking a little as I pushed open the heavy doors, but I kept walking toward the meeting room where a group of women and a few men were gathered around a circular table. Janet, the librarian, welcomed me warmly and introduced me to the group. There was Mrs. Anderson, a retired teacher who'd lived in the neighborhood for 40 years. There was Rosa, a young mother who brought her baby and somehow managed to participate thoughtfully despite frequently having to bounce him on her lap. There was Mr. Park, recently widowed like me, who spoke with quiet wisdom about loss and resilience. We talked about Amy Tan's novel, about mothers and daughters, about the stories we carry and the stories that carry us. For 2 hours, nobody asked me for money or childcare or favors. They asked for my opinions, my thoughts, my interpretation of characters and themes. They listened when I spoke and made me feel like what I had to say mattered. Walking home that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. The streetlights on Lincoln Avenue seemed brighter, the autumn air seemed crisper. I was still the same woman who'd been crying in her shower a week earlier, but something fundamental had shifted. I'd remembered that I was more than someone's mother, more than someone's babysitter, more than someone's source of emergency funds. I was Eleanor McGrath, a woman with thoughts and opinions and interests of her own. The next morning, Michael called. Mom, what's going on? Sarah said you wouldn't help us out last week. That's not like you. His voice carried disappointment and confusion, as if my behavior was a puzzle he needed to solve. I joined a book club, I said simply. A book club? Mom, that's great, but you know we depend on you. Especially with the boys. They love spending time with their grandmother. There it was, the gentle manipulation wrapped in statements about love and family obligation. How could I refuse to help when the boys loved spending time with me? How could I be so selfish as to put my own interests first? But this time, I heard it differently. This time, I heard the assumption that my time belonged to them, that my needs were secondary, that my role was to be available whenever they required assistance. Michael, I said, I love Tommy and Jake more than life itself. But I need to have my own life too. I need to do things that make me happy. Of course you do, Mom. But can't you schedule your book club around when we need you? The question hung in the air between us. Can't you arrange your happiness around our convenience? Can't you continue to make yourself smaller so we can stay comfortable? No, I said. I can't. It was the second time in a week I'd said that word, and it was getting easier each time. Over the following days, the phone calls and texts became more frequent, more insistent. Sarah started calling me directly, her voice switching between wounded and angry. I don't understand what's gotten into you, Ellie. We've always been able to count on you. Now suddenly you're too busy for family. But I wasn't too busy for family. I was too busy to be taken for granted, too busy to be treated like a credit card with legs, too busy to accept love that came with conditions and strings attached. 3 weeks after that first book club meeting, I came home to find Michael and Sarah waiting in my hallway. They had serious expressions and a manila folder that made my stomach clench with anxiety. Mom, we need to talk, Michael said as I unlocked my apartment door. Inside, they sat on my couch while I made tea with hands that shook slightly. The manila folder lay between us on the coffee table like an accusation. Mom, Michael began, his voice gentle but firm, we're worried about you. This behavior, these changes, they're not healthy. Maybe it's time to consider some alternatives. Sarah leaned forward, her expression what she probably thought was caring. There are some really nice assisted living facilities in the area, Ellie. Places where you could have more social interaction, professional care if you need it. The room seemed to tilt sideways. This was what they'd been discussing that morning in the shower when they thought I couldn't hear them. This was their plan to get me gone soon. I don't need assisted living, I said quietly. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Are you, though? Sarah's mask slipped slightly, revealing the impatience underneath. You're isolated, you're making strange decisions, you're refusing to help family. These could be signs of cognitive decline. Cognitive decline. Because asserting my independence, because having my own interests, because saying no to their demands meant something must be wrong with my mind. I joined a book club, I said, my voice rising slightly. I started having my own opinions and making my own plans. How is that cognitive decline? Michael opened the manila folder and pulled out some pamphlets. Just look at these places, Mom. This one has activities every day. Bingo, crafts, movie nights. You'd have friends your own age. I looked at the glossy brochures with their stock photos of smiling elderly people engaged in supervised fun. Everyone looked clean and safe and completely without autonomy. And it would make things easier for everyone, Sarah added. You wouldn't have to worry about maintaining this apartment, and we wouldn't have to worry about you being alone so much. There it was, the truth beneath all their apparent concern. This wasn't about what was best for me. This was about what was most convenient for them. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting after sitting too long in one position. Get out, I said quietly. Mom, don't be unreasonable. We're trying to help you. Get out. The words erupted from somewhere deep inside me, somewhere that had been silent for far too long. This is my home. I've lived here for 38 years, and I'll decide if and when I'm ready to leave. They exchanged glances, the kind of look parents give each other when dealing with a difficult child. We're not trying to force you into anything, Mom. We're just presenting options. But they were trying to force me. They were trying to solve the problem of my inconvenient independence by warehousing me somewhere I couldn't interfere with their plans for my apartment, my money, my future. The only option I'm interested in, I said, walking to the front door and holding it open, is being treated with respect by my own family. If you can't do that, then we have nothing more to discuss. They left, but not without Michael giving me one last wounded look, as if I was the one behaving unreasonably. As if I was the one who'd betrayed the bonds of family. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation, second-guessing myself, wondering if I was being stubborn and difficult. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was showing signs of decline. Maybe I was being selfish by clinging to my independence when it would be easier for everyone if I just went along with their plans. But then I remembered the feeling I'd had at book club, the sense of being valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. I remembered the pride I'd felt when I said no to babysitting because I had my own plans. I remembered what it felt like to matter. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I called a lawyer. The legal aid office downtown was nothing like the polished law firms I'd seen on television. It was cramped and busy, with mismatched furniture and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly green. But the lawyer who met with me, a young woman named Jennifer Santos, listened to my story with the same attention the book club had given to Amy Tan's characters. Mrs. McGrath, she said when I finished explaining the situation, you have every right to make your own decisions about where and how you want to live. Has anyone actually been declared incompetent by a court? No, I said. They just think I should be more manageable. Jennifer nodded knowingly. Family members sometimes confuse independence with defiance. Let me ask you this, do you understand your financial situation? Can you manage your daily activities? Are you taking proper care of yourself? I answered yes to all her questions, and she made notes on a yellow legal pad. What I'd recommend, she said, is that we prepare some documents that clearly establish your wishes while you're still able to make these decisions freely. A living will, a power of attorney that specifies exactly who can make decisions for you and under what circumstances. Think of it as insurance against anyone trying to override your autonomy. For the first time in weeks, I felt like someone was on my side. Over the next few days, I thought carefully about what I wanted those documents to say. Who did I trust to make medical decisions for me if I couldn't make them myself? Who would I want handling my finances if I became incapacitated? The answers surprised me. I realized I trusted Mrs. Ramirez, my neighbor from across the hall, more than I trusted my own son. Mrs. Ramirez was the one who checked on me when I'd had that bad cold last winter. She was the one who brought me soup and didn't expect anything in return. She was the one who listened without judgment and offered companionship without conditions. Mrs. Ramirez had moved to Chicago from El Salvador 30 years ago, and she understood what it meant to build a life from scratch, to be underestimated, to have your wisdom dismissed because of your age or accent or economic status. When I knocked on her door that Thursday evening and asked if we could talk, she welcomed me with the kind of warmth my own family had forgotten how to show. Ellie, she said, settling into her favorite armchair with 2 cups of tea, you look different. Stronger, maybe? I told her everything. About the conversation I'd overheard, about the assisted living brochures, about the lawyer and the legal documents. I told her things I'd never told anyone, about how lonely I'd been since Frank died, about how desperate I'd become for any scraps of attention from Michael and Sarah. You know what I think? Mrs. Ramirez said when I finished. I think you've been starving yourself. Not for food, but for respect. And now you're finally ready to eat. She agreed to be my power of attorney for healthcare decisions, and she agreed to something else too. She wanted to be my friend, not because she needed something from me, but because she enjoyed my company. She wanted to go to book club meetings together, maybe catch a matinee movie downtown once in a while, perhaps try that new Cuban restaurant on Diversey. For the first time in 5 years, I had plans to look forward to that didn't involve anyone else's agenda. Meanwhile, my phone had been mercifully quiet. No calls from Michael, no texts from Sarah asking for favors or money or babysitting. The silence felt different now than it had before. Before, the silence had felt like punishment, like evidence of my worthlessness. Now it felt like peace. But I should have known it wouldn't last. November arrived with an early snowfall that blanketed Chicago in pristine white. I was coming home from grocery shopping when I found them waiting in the lobby of my building. Not Michael and Sarah this time, but Tommy and Jake, my 8-year-old grandsons, still in their school uniforms and looking confused and a little scared. "Grandma Ellie." Tommy ran to me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "We missed you so much." My heart melted instantly. These children hadn't done anything wrong. They were innocent victims of their parents' manipulation, just as I had been. "What are you boys doing here?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Mom and Dad said we should come see you," Jake explained, his voice smaller than his twin brother's. "They said you were sick and might want some company." Sick. So that was the new narrative. I wasn't asserting my independence, I was ill and needed to be managed accordingly. I took the boys upstairs and called Michael immediately. "Where are you?" I demanded when he answered. "Your children are here alone." "They're not alone, Mom. They're with their grandmother who loves them." "Michael, they're 8 years old. You can't just drop them off without permission and walk away." "We didn't walk away. We're at Sarah's mother's house in Naperville. We thought you might enjoy some time with Tommy and Jake, especially since you've been so distant lately." The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. They'd abandoned their children at my apartment without warning, then framed it as a favor to me. And if I objected, I'd look like a grandmother who didn't want to spend time with her grandchildren. "How long are you planning to leave them here?" I asked. "Just until tomorrow evening. We have that work retreat I told you about." He hadn't told me about any work retreat, but correcting him would have been pointless. "Fine," I said. "But this is the last time you pull a stunt like this. Next time, you ask first." After I hung up, I looked at Tommy and Jake, who were sitting on my couch looking uncertain about the tension they'd witnessed. "Are you really sick, Grandma?" Jake asked. "No, sweetheart. I'm not sick. Your parents and I just have some grown-up disagreements about some things." "Are you mad at us?" Tommy wanted to know. "Never," I said firmly. "I could never be mad at you too. You didn't do anything wrong." We spent that evening and the next day together, and I was reminded of why I'd fallen in love with being a grandmother in the first place. The boys helped me make pancakes for breakfast, and flour ended up everywhere. We played board games and watched movies and built a fort out of couch cushions. They asked me to tell them stories about their grandfather Frank, and I shared memories I hadn't spoken aloud in years. But I also noticed things I'd been too desperate for connection to see before. The boys expected to be entertained constantly. They complained when I suggested quiet activities like reading or drawing. They made demands rather than requests, saying things like, "I want juice," instead of, "May I please have some juice?" They weren't bad children, but they'd learned that Grandma Ellie's house was a place where rules didn't apply, where they could get whatever they wanted without having to say please or thank you. I was as much to blame for this as their parents were. In my eagerness to be loved, I'd forgotten to teach them how to love others. That night, after the boys were asleep on my pull-out couch, I sat quietly in my kitchen, sipping tea and thinking about the patterns that had shaped our relationships. I'd trained my family to see me as infinitely available, endlessly giving, never needing anything for myself. I'd been so afraid of being unloved that I'd made myself unlovable, turning myself into a resource instead of a person. When Michael came to pick up the boys the next evening, I was ready for him. "Did you have fun with Grandma?" he asked Tommy and Jake, but his eyes were on me, searching for signs that I'd been won over by their strategic deployment of grandchildren. "We had a great time," I said calmly. "And now we need to talk about boundaries." Michael's face tightened. "Mom, please don't start. I'm not starting anything. I'm finishing something. You don't get to drop your children off here without asking. You don't get to lie to them about me being sick to manipulate their emotions. And you don't get to use their love for me as a weapon in whatever war you think we're fighting." "War? Mom, there's no war. We're family. Family doesn't treat each other the way you've been treating me, Michael. Family doesn't plot about someone's death while they're in the shower. Family doesn't try to have someone declared incompetent because they joined a book club." His face flushed red. "You heard that?" "Every word." We stared at each other across my small living room, and I saw the moment he realized that his sweet, accommodating mother was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who knew her own worth, who had people in her life who valued her for who she was rather than what she could provide. "Boys," I said, turning to Tommy and Jake, "give Grandma Ellie a hug goodbye. I love you both very much." They hugged me tightly, and Jake whispered, "Will we see you soon, Grandma?" "Of course you will, sweetheart. But next time, your parents will ask first, and we'll make proper plans." After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not the desperate peace of someone who'd been running from conflict, but the deep peace of someone who'd finally stopped running and decided to stand her ground. That peace lasted exactly 1 week. The call came on a Tuesday evening while I was preparing dinner and getting ready for book club. This week we were discussing The Handmaid's Tale, and I'd been looking forward to the discussion all week. "Mom?" Michael's voice sounded strained, different somehow. "What's wrong?" I asked, because there was definitely something wrong. "It's Sarah. She's in the hospital. Emergency appendectomy. They took her into surgery an hour ago." My motherly instincts kicked in immediately, overriding everything else. "Oh my God. Is she okay? What can I do? Do you need me to watch the boys?" "Actually, yes. Could you come over? I want to get back to the hospital, but someone needs to be with Tommy and Jake." "Of course. I'll be right there." I hung up the phone and immediately called Mrs. Ramirez to let her know I wouldn't make book club that evening. "Family emergency," I explained, and she understood completely. But as I gathered my things and headed for the door, something nagged at me. A feeling that I couldn't quite identify, like a word on the tip of my tongue that wouldn't come. Michael and Sarah lived in a small house in Albany Park, about 20 minutes from my apartment by bus. I'd been there countless times for birthday parties and holidays, but as I walked up the front steps that evening, something felt different. The house was fully lit, every window glowing warm and yellow against the November darkness. I could hear music playing inside, and was that laughter? I rang the doorbell, and Sarah answered the door. Sarah, who was supposed to be in the hospital recovering from emergency surgery. "Oh," she said, her face freezing in an expression of shock and something that might have been shame. "Ellie, what are you doing here?" Behind her, I could see into the living room where Michael was sitting on the couch with a beer in his hand, watching television. Tommy and Jake were on the floor playing video games, clearly not in need of emergency babysitting. "Michael called me," I said slowly. "He said you were in the hospital. That you'd had emergency surgery." Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Over her shoulder, Michael had gone very still, realizing that their plan had just fallen apart. We. Sarah started, then seemed to give up on explanation entirely. "What's really going on here?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand. Michael appeared behind Sarah, his face red with embarrassment and something that might have been anger. "Mom, we can explain." "Explain what?" "That you lied to me? That you made up a medical emergency to trick me into babysitting?" The magnitude of their deception hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just manipulated me, they'd been willing to let me believe someone I cared about was seriously hurt in order to get what they wanted. "We knew you wouldn't say yes if we just asked," Sarah said, as if this justified everything. "You've been so unreliable lately." "Unreliable?" "Because I'd joined a book club and asserted my right to make my own plans." "So you decided to lie instead?" "We didn't lie exactly," Michael said. We knew you'd want to help if you thought it was an emergency." That's the definition of lying, Michael. Using false information to manipulate someone's behavior. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised with what I thought were good values, and I barely recognized him. When had he become someone who could lie so casually to his own mother? When had his wife become someone who could look me in the eye and pretend to be grateful while stabbing me in the back? "I'm leaving," I said quietly. "Mom, come on. Don't be dramatic. We're sorry, okay? We just needed a night out. You're sorry you got caught. You're not sorry you lied." "Fine." Sarah's voice rose, and I realized she'd been drinking. There was a wine glass on the coffee table behind her, and her cheeks had the flush that came with liquid courage. "Fine, delete. Do you want to know why? Because nothing else works with you anymore. You used to be helpful. You used to care about family. Now you're so selfish, so caught up in your stupid book club and your stupid independence that you don't care about anyone else." The words hit me like slaps across the face, each one designed to cut deep, to make me doubt myself, to make me crawl back to them apologizing for my unreasonable desire to be treated with respect. "Selfish?" I repeated quietly. "I've given you $15,000 over the past 5 years. I've babysat your children hundreds of times, often without notice. I've canceled my own plans countless times to accommodate your needs. How exactly is that selfish?" "That money was yours to give," Michael said. "We're family. Family helps each other." "No," I said, my voice growing stronger. "Family respects each other. Family tells the truth to each other. Family doesn't plot about each other's deaths or try to manipulate each other into giving up their homes." I turned to leave, but Sarah's voice followed me. "Go ahead and walk away. But don't come crawling back to us when you're lonely and miserable and have no one left who cares about you." I stopped on the front porch and turned back to look at her, this woman who'd married my son and somehow convinced him that treating his mother like garbage was acceptable. Sarah, I said calmly, I've been lonely and miserable for years. The difference is that now I know it's not my fault. The bus ride home felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. I sat in the back, watching the city lights blur past the windows, and tried to process what had just happened. They'd been willing to lie about a medical emergency to manipulate me. They'd called me selfish for wanting basic respect. They'd made it clear that in their minds, my only value was what I could provide for them. But what hurt most wasn't their deception or their cruelty. What hurt most was the realization that I'd raised a son who could treat his mother this way. Somewhere along the line, I'd failed to teach him that other people's feelings mattered, that family meant more than just having people available to use when convenient. Had I been too giving when he was young? Had I failed to set enough boundaries to teach him that love was supposed to be reciprocal? These thoughts tormented me throughout the night. I kept thinking about moments from Michael's childhood, searching for clues about where I'd gone wrong, how I'd failed as a mother. But by morning, a different realization had emerged. I hadn't failed as a mother. I'd done the best I could with the tools and knowledge I had at the time. Michael's choices now, as an adult, were his own responsibility. I could grieve for the relationship we'd never have, but I couldn't keep sacrificing my well-being in a futile attempt to fix something that was broken beyond my ability to repair. That morning, I called Jennifer Santos, my lawyer, and made an appointment to update my will. I want to make some changes, I told her when we met later that week. Some significant changes. I'd been thinking about this decision for days, and I was finally ready to act on it. The bulk of my estate, including my life insurance policy and savings, would go to charity. An educational fund for disadvantaged children in Chicago, a program that helped elderly people maintain their independence, and a scholarship fund for community college students who couldn't afford tuition. I left small amounts for Tommy and Jake, enough to help with college someday but not enough for anyone to fight over. And I left nothing at all for Michael and Sarah. Are you sure about this, Mrs. McGrath? Jennifer asked gently. These are big decisions, and family relationships can be complicated. I'm sure, I said. I've spent the last 5 years trying to buy love from people who weren't interested in selling it. I'd rather my money go to people who can actually use it to build better lives. She prepared the documents, and I signed them with a steady hand. It felt like closing one chapter of my life and opening another. Meanwhile, my phone had been ominously quiet. No calls from Michael, no texts from Sarah, no unexpected visits from grandchildren. The silence stretched from days into weeks, and I began to realize this might be how things ended between us. Not with a dramatic confrontation or a tearful reconciliation, but with the simple absence of connection. And surprisingly, I was okay with that. The desperate need I'd felt for their approval, their attention, their love, was fading like a headache when the pain medication finally kicks in. I was building a different kind of life, one centered on people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. Mrs. Ramirez and I had become genuine friends, sharing meals and movies and long conversations about our lives. The book club had welcomed me as a regular member, and I'd even volunteered to host December's meeting in my apartment. I'd started taking a painting class at the senior center, something I'd always wanted to try but never felt I deserved the time or money for. My first attempts were terrible, but the instructor, a patient woman named Carol, insisted that the joy was in the process, not the product. I was learning, at 72 years old, what it felt like to live for myself instead of constantly trying to earn love from people who'd made it clear I wasn't worth loving unless I was useful. But family drama has a way of finding you, even when you think you've escaped it. 3 days before Christmas, I came home from grocery shopping to find an envelope that had been slipped under my door. My name was written on it in unfamiliar handwriting, and there was no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout of what looked like a social media post. It was from Sarah's Facebook page, and it was dated the day before. Please keep our family in your thoughts during this difficult time. Michael's mother has been struggling with some serious mental health issues lately, and it's been really hard on the boys. She's become increasingly paranoid and hostile, accusing us of terrible things that never happened. We've tried to help her, but she's refused all our attempts at support. We're heartbroken that the grandmother Tommy and Jake adore has changed so much. Mental illness is so devastating, especially when it affects the elderly. We're hoping she gets the help she needs before it's too late. I read the post 3 times before the full implications hit me. Sarah had essentially announced to their entire social network, including extended family members, mutual friends, and community acquaintances, that I was mentally ill. She'd painted herself and Michael as long-suffering victims of my paranoid accusations, and herself as the concerned daughter-in-law trying to help. Every ounce of strength I'd built up over the past few months crumbled in the space of those few sentences. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was character assassination, a deliberate attempt to destroy my reputation in our community. I thought about all the people who might have seen this post. Michael's cousins, who I'd known since they were children. Sarah's friends from the school where she worked part-time. Neighbors who might recognize me from the grocery store or the bus stop. How many people now thought of me as the crazy old lady who'd lost her mind? The cruelest part was how skillfully Sarah had woven truth together with lies. I had accused them of terrible things like plotting my death and trying to manipulate me into assisted living. But those accusations were true, not paranoid delusions. By framing my legitimate responses to their mistreatment as mental illness, she'd made it impossible for me to defend myself without sounding exactly like the crazy person she was claiming I was. I sat on my couch, holding that piece of paper, and felt the familiar weight of despair settling over me like a heavy blanket. For a moment, I was tempted to call Michael, to try to explain, to beg him to make Sarah take down the post. I was ready to crawl back to them and apologize for everything, just to make this public humiliation stop. But then I heard Mrs. Ramirez's voice through the thin wall that separated our apartments. She was humming while she cooked dinner, a lilting melody that reminded me of the lullabies my own mother used to sing. And I remembered what she'd said about starving myself for respect, about finally being ready to eat. This was my choice point. I could let Sarah's lies drive me back into their toxic orbit, accepting abuse in exchange for their version of love. Or I could stand firm in the truth I knew about myself, regardless of what anyone else chose to believe. I folded the paper carefully and put it in my desk drawer. Then I called Jennifer Santos. "I need to ask you about defamation law," I said when she answered. "What's happened, Mrs. McGrath?" I read her the Facebook post, and there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "This is serious," she said finally. "Publicly claiming someone is mentally ill when you have no medical basis for that statement could definitely constitute defamation. Especially if it affects your reputation in the community or causes you emotional distress. What would pursuing this look like?" "We'd start with a cease and desist letter, demanding she take down the post and refrain from making similar statements. If she refuses, we could file a lawsuit, though that would be expensive and time-consuming." I thought about this carefully. Did I want to spend my remaining years fighting legal battles with my own family? Did I want to drag this conflict through the courts, making it even more public and painful? "Let's start with the cease and desist letter," I decided. Maybe that will be enough to make her take it down. But even as I said it, I suspected Sarah wasn't going to back down easily. She'd escalated this conflict to a new level, and she wasn't going to retreat just because a lawyer sent her a formal letter. I was right. When Jennifer called me back 3 days later, her voice was grim. "She's refused to take down the post." Her response was, "Well, it wasn't helpful. She claims everything she posted was true, and she's not required to take it down." What happens now? Now we decide how far you want to take this. We could file suit, but it would mean months or years of legal proceedings. Your family situation would become part of the public record. Every detail of your relationship with your son and daughter-in-law would be examined and argued over. The thought made me feel sick. Whatever privacy and dignity I had left would be destroyed in the process of trying to restore my reputation. Is there another option? You could do nothing legally and just live your life. Sometimes the best response to lies is simply continuing to live authentically. The people who matter will see who you really are. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and thought about what Jennifer had said. The people who matter will see who you really are. Who were the people who mattered to me now? Mrs. Ramirez, who brought me soup when I was sick and never asked for anything in return. The book club members who valued my insights and enjoyed my company. Carol from the painting class, who encouraged my artistic efforts without judgment. Jennifer, who treated me with respect and helped me understand my rights. None of these people had seen Sarah's Facebook post. None of them thought I was mentally ill or paranoid. They knew me as Eleanor McGrath, a woman with opinions and interests and dignity. The people who mattered were the people who'd gotten to know me as a person rather than just someone's mother or grandmother or source of emergency funds. I made a decision that night, sitting in my quiet kitchen with the snow falling softly outside my window. I wasn't going to let Sarah's lies drive me back into hiding. I wasn't going to let fear of what people might think keep me from living the life I'd worked so hard to build. Instead, I was going to do something radical. I was going to be happy. 1 week after Christmas, I hosted the book club's meeting in my apartment for the first time. I spent the morning preparing, cleaning, and arranging chairs in a circle in my living room. I made coffee and bought cookies from the bakery on Lincoln Avenue, the good ones with the almonds that cost more than I used to think I deserved. When the book club members arrived, they brought warmth and laughter into my space. We discussed our latest novel while snow fell outside my windows, and for 2 hours, my apartment felt like the heart of a community instead of a shrine to loneliness. After everyone left, Mrs. Ramirez lingered to help me clean up. "You know," she said, washing coffee cups while I put chairs back in their proper places, "I've been thinking about what you told me, about that Facebook post. I'd shared Sarah's character assassination with her the week before, needing to tell someone who would understand the full scope of the cruelty. I keep thinking about my own daughter, Mrs. Ramirez continued. She lives in California now, and we don't talk as much as we used to. But if someone told me she was saying terrible things about me on the internet, you know what I think I would do? What? Nothing. Because the daughter I raised wouldn't do that. And if she did, then she's not the person I thought she was, and that's her loss, not mine. Her words hit me with the force of revelation. I'd been so focused on trying to fix my relationship with Michael, on defending myself against Sarah's lies, on proving that I wasn't the terrible person they claimed I was, that I'd lost sight of a simple truth. I'd raised Michael with love and sacrifice and the best intentions I had. If he'd chosen to become someone who could treat his mother cruelly, that was his choice and his loss. I couldn't fix him, and I couldn't make him love me the way I deserved to be loved. But I could love myself that way. I could treat myself with the respect and kindness I'd been begging for from other people. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Frank died. I took a long, hot bath with lavender soap, lit candles around the bathroom, and played soft music. I treated myself like someone worth cherishing, someone deserving of comfort and luxury. When I looked in the mirror afterward, I saw something different than I'd seen in years. Not a desperate old woman begging for scraps of love, but a survivor. Someone who'd been through hell and come out the other side with her dignity intact. The new year arrived quietly. No calls from Michael or Sarah, no surprise visits from grandchildren, no manufactured emergencies or requests for money. For the first time in years, my holidays belonged to me. I spent New Year's Eve with Mrs. Ramirez, watching movies and eating popcorn and talking about our plans for the coming year. She wanted to start a garden in the courtyard behind our building. I wanted to take a trip, maybe to New York to visit the museums I'd always dreamed of seeing. We could go together, she suggested. Split the hotel cost, keep each other company. The idea filled me with excitement I hadn't felt in years. A real trip, planned for my own enjoyment, paid for with money I'd saved instead of lending to people who would never pay me back. February brought the first legal victory I'd experienced in this entire ordeal. Jennifer called to tell me that Sarah had finally taken down the Facebook post, not because of our cease and desist letter, but because Facebook's policies prohibited false medical claims about private individuals. Several people reported the post as harassment, Jennifer explained. It looks like not everyone believed her version of events. I felt a surge of gratitude toward whoever had stood up for me, anonymous strangers who'd seen through Sarah's manipulation and taken action to defend me. The post's removal didn't undo all the damage, but it felt like a vindication of sorts. The truth had value, even if it sometimes took time to emerge. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came a surprising visitor. I was coming home from painting class on a Thursday afternoon when I found Tommy sitting on the steps outside my building. He was in his school uniform, his backpack beside him, looking smaller and more uncertain than I remembered. "Tommy? What are you doing here, sweetheart?" "Hi, Grandma Ellie. I took the bus from school. I wanted to see you." My heart clenched with a mixture of love and concern. "Does your dad know where you are?" He shook his head, and I could see tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. "Come upstairs," I said gently. "We need to call your parents and let them know you're safe." In my apartment, Tommy sat on the couch while I made the dreaded phone call to Michael. When he answered, I could hear panic in his voice. "Tommy's here with me," I said immediately. "He's safe. Thank God. We've been looking everywhere." "How did he?" "He took the bus from school. He wanted to see his grandmother." There was a pause, and I could almost hear Michael calculating how much trouble this visit was going to cause. "We'll be right there to get him." "Michael, wait. Let me talk to him first. He came here for a reason." After I hung up, I sat next to Tommy on the couch and asked him to tell me what was really going on. "Mom and Dad fight all the time now," he said quietly. "About money and about you and about everything. And they say mean things about you, and I don't like it." "What kind of mean things?" "They say you're crazy and mean and that you don't love me and Jake anymore. But I don't believe them. You were always nice to us. You always made us feel happy." Out of the mouths of babes. This 8-year-old child had seen through his parents' manipulation more clearly than many adults would have. "Tommy," I said carefully, "I want you to know that I love you and Jake more than anything in the world. That will never change, no matter what happens between your parents and me." "Then why don't you come see us anymore?" How do you explain emotional abuse to a child? How do you tell an 8-year-old that his parents have been treating you terribly without making him feel responsible or afraid? "Sometimes adults have disagreements that are hard to fix," I said. "Your parents and I see things very differently about some important things. But that doesn't mean I don't love you. It just means we need some time to figure things out. Will you figure things out soon?" "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so." When Michael and Sarah arrived 20 minutes later, the tension in my small apartment was thick enough to cut with a knife. Tommy ran to his father, but I noticed he didn't hug Sarah, and she seemed to notice too. Tommy, Michael said sternly, you can't just leave school like that. We were terrified. I wanted to see Grandma Ellie, Tommy said, his voice small but defiant. Sarah stepped forward, her face tight with anger. Tommy, we've talked about this. Your grandmother isn't well right now. She needs space to get better. I'm sitting right here, I said quietly. And I'm perfectly well. Are you? Sarah's voice was sharp, challenging. Because posting false accusations about your family on social media seems pretty unwell to me. I stared at her, confused. I haven't posted anything about you anywhere. Really? What about that review you left about my workplace? What about the comments on the school district's Facebook page? A chill ran down my spine. Sarah, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't written any reviews or made any comments about you. But even as I said it, I realized what must have happened. Someone with access to my personal information had been impersonating me online, posting negative things about Sarah in my name. And given that Michael and Sarah were the only people who knew details about my life and my computer passwords, the list of suspects was very short. Show me, I said firmly. Show me these posts you're talking about. Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through several screenshots. There was my name attached to comments calling Sarah unprofessional and unstable, reviews claiming she was a bad employee, posts suggesting she was an unfit mother. The comments captured my voice perfectly, reflecting things I'd said in private conversations or in my own mind. But I'd never written any of them down, and I certainly hadn't posted them publicly. Sarah, I said carefully, I didn't write any of these. Someone is impersonating me online. Right. Just like you didn't refuse to help us with the kids, and you didn't join some cult book club, and you didn't turn into a completely different person overnight. Cult book club. The phrase would have been funny if the situation hadn't been so serious. But Michael was looking at the screenshots with a frown, and I could see doubt starting to creep into his expression. Mom, he said slowly, these posts are from your Facebook account. I don't have a Facebook account. Yes, you do. You've had one for 3 years. Don't you remember? I set it up for you so you could see pictures of the boys. I did remember that, vaguely. Michael had helped me create some kind of online account so I could see photos they posted of Tommy and Jake. But I'd never used it after that initial setup, never even remembered the password. Michael, I haven't used that account since you created it. I don't even remember how to log in. He looked at Sarah, then back at me, and I could see him trying to decide who to believe. The posts come from your account, from your computer, Sarah insisted. We checked the IP address. That was when I knew for certain that someone had been using my computer, my internet connection, my identity to post these things. And there were only 2 people who had keys to my apartment and knew how to access my computer. But looking at Michael's face, I realized he would never believe his wife was capable of something so calculating, so cruel. He would rather believe his mother had lost her mind than accept that the woman he'd married was a manipulative liar. In that moment, I made a decision that surprised even me. I decided I didn't care anymore whether he believed me or not. Tommy, I said, turning to my grandson, I want you to remember something, okay? I love you and Jake very much. No matter what anyone tells you, no matter what happens, that will always be true. Tommy nodded solemnly, and I could see in his eyes that he understood more about the situation than his parents realized. We're leaving, Sarah announced, taking Tommy's hand and pulling him toward the door. Michael lingered for a moment, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Sadness? Regret? Or just exhaustion with the whole situation? Mom, he said quietly, I don't want things to be this way between us. Neither do I, Michael. But wanting something isn't enough if you're not willing to do what it takes to make it happen. What do you want me to do? I want you to stop believing every lie your wife tells about me. I want you to treat me with basic respect. I want you to acknowledge that your mother isn't the enemy in your marriage. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see the conflict playing out behind his eyes. On one side was his wife, the mother of his children, his partner in the life he'd built. On the other side was his mother, the woman who'd raised him and loved him unconditionally for 35 years. The fact that it was even a difficult choice told me everything I needed to know about how far we'd fallen. I'll talk to Sarah, he said finally. Maybe we can work something out. But his voice carried no conviction, and I knew talking to Sarah would consist of him relaying my request and Sarah explaining why it was unreasonable, manipulative, or evidence of my mental decline. After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment and felt something I hadn't expected, relief. The worst had happened. My own family had openly treated me like the enemy, had accused me of things I didn't do, had made it clear that I was unwelcome in their lives unless I accepted abuse without complaint. And I was still here. I was still breathing, still thinking clearly, still capable of loving and being loved by people who deserved my affection. The next morning, I called Jennifer Santos and told her about the fake social media posts. "This is identity theft," she said immediately. "It's also harassment, cyberbullying, and possibly defamation. We need to report this to the police." Will anyone believe me? I mean, technically the posts did come from my account, from my computer. Mrs. McGrath, I've been representing elderly clients for 15 years. What you're describing is a common form of elder abuse. Adult children gain access to their parents' accounts and use them to isolate them from friends and support systems. The authorities are familiar with these tactics. Filing a police report felt surreal. I sat in a sterile room at the Clark Street station, telling a young officer about how my own family had been impersonating me online. He listened without judgment, took notes, and explained that they'd need to examine my computer to trace the origin of the posts. "Ma'am," he said when I finished giving my statement, "I want you to know that this kind of thing happens more often than you'd think. Family members sometimes think they know what's best for elderly relatives, and they're willing to go to extreme lengths to maintain control." 3 days later, the police called with their findings. The fake posts had been created from my computer, but during times when I had been verifiably elsewhere. They'd checked the timestamps against security footage from my painting class, my book club meetings, and grocery store receipts. "Someone was accessing your apartment and your computer regularly over a period of several months," the officer explained. "They were careful to do it when you weren't home, but they weren't careful enough to disguise the timing." I thought about all the times Michael and Sarah had visited, all the times they'd had access to my apartment with the spare key I'd given them for emergencies. How many times had one of them distracted me in the living room while the other used my computer in the bedroom? The cruelty was breathtaking. They hadn't just been manipulating me, they'd been systematically destroying my reputation, making it impossible for me to maintain friendships or community connections. They'd been isolating me, making me completely dependent on them so I'd have no choice but to accept whatever treatment they decided to give me. But their plan had a fatal flaw. They'd underestimated my capacity for independence and my ability to build new relationships based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. The police investigation led to charges against Sarah for identity theft and harassment. When Jennifer called to tell me, her voice carried a satisfaction I rarely heard from lawyers. She's agreed to a plea deal. Community service, restitution for legal fees, and a restraining order that requires her to stay away from you and your property. She also has to attend counseling for anger management. What about Michael? The evidence suggests Sarah was acting alone. Your son may have been manipulated too, Mrs. McGrath. This kind of systematic emotional abuse affects everyone in the family system. I wanted to believe that was true, that Michael had been an innocent victim of his wife's manipulation. But I remembered the conversation I'd overheard in the shower, the way he talked about my death as if it were a financial opportunity. He might not have been the mastermind, but he hadn't been entirely innocent either. The restraining order meant Sarah couldn't come within 500 feet of me or my building. It meant she couldn't contact me directly or through third parties. It meant, essentially, that I was free of her forever. But it also meant that my relationship with my grandchildren would be even more complicated. Sarah wasn't going to allow them to visit me, and Michael wasn't going to stand up to her on my behalf. I grieved for that loss, for the relationship with Tommy and Jake that had been poisoned by adult conflicts they couldn't understand or control. But I also recognized that I couldn't sacrifice my own well-being to maintain access to children whose parents were using them as weapons against me. Summer arrived with a heat wave that made my old building's air conditioning work overtime. I'd been living my new life for almost a year now, and the changes felt less dramatic, more settled. I was no longer the desperate woman who'd stood crying in her shower, listening to her family plan her obsolescence. Mrs. Ramirez and I took that trip to New York in July. We spent 4 days visiting museums, walking through Central Park, seeing a Broadway show that made us both cry with its beauty. We ate expensive dinners and stayed in a nice hotel, and I felt like a person worthy of experiences and adventures. On our last night there, we sat in a bar overlooking the Hudson River, watching the sun set over New Jersey with glasses of wine that cost more than I used to spend on groceries for a week. "You know what I keep thinking?" Mrs. Ramirez said, raising her glass in a toast. "I keep thinking about how much they lost when they decided you weren't worth loving." "They lost me," I agreed. "But I wonder if they even realize it. Maybe they will someday. Maybe they won't. But that's not your problem anymore." She was right. I'd spent so much energy trying to make people love me, trying to earn affection and respect from people who were determined not to give it, that I'd forgotten the most important love story of all, the one between me and myself. Back in Chicago, life settled into rhythms that felt sustainable and joyful. Book club every other Tuesday, painting class on Thursdays, grocery shopping at the farmer's market on Saturdays with Mrs. Ramirez. Small pleasures, quiet accomplishments, the kind of daily happiness I'd never allowed myself when I was constantly available for other people's crises. I started volunteering at a literacy program for immigrants, helping people like Mrs. Ramirez learn to navigate American bureaucracy and improve their English. The work felt meaningful in a way that babysitting on demand and lending money to ungrateful relatives never had. In September, something unexpected happened. I got a call from Jennifer Santos, but this time it wasn't about legal proceedings or restraining orders. "Mrs. McGrath, I have a strange question. Do you remember when we talked about your power of attorney documents, how you designated Mrs. Ramirez for healthcare decisions?" "Of course." "Well, I just got a call from someone claiming to be your son, asking about your mental competency and whether the power of attorney could be challenged." My stomach dropped. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that you're my client, not him, and that I couldn't discuss your affairs with him unless you gave explicit permission." "But Mrs. McGrath, I'm concerned. This sounds like someone is still trying to gain control over your decisions." That evening, I called Michael directly for the first time in months. "Michael, I understand you called my lawyer asking about my mental competency." There was a long pause. "Mom, I'm worried about you. The way you've been acting, the changes in your behavior, maybe you should see a doctor." "I see doctors regularly, Michael. I'm in perfect health, physically and mentally. But the things you've accused us of, the paranoia about Sarah, the isolation from family." "The isolation from family is because my family has been treating me terribly. The accusations about Sarah were true, as the police investigation proved. And the paranoia is actually just pattern recognition." "Mom, please. Can't we just start over? Can't we try to be a family again?" The question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. "Michael, what would starting over look like to you?" "Well, maybe you could apologize for the things that happened with Sarah. Maybe you could drop the restraining order. We could have Sunday dinners again, and you could spend time with Tommy and Jake." In other words, starting over meant I would apologize for being abused, give up the legal protection I'd fought to obtain, and return to the exact situation that had nearly destroyed me. "And what would you and Sarah do differently?" I asked. Another pause. "We'd try to be more understanding of your needs." Try to be more understanding. Not actually respect my boundaries, not treat me with dignity, not acknowledge the harm they'd caused. Just try to be more understanding, as if the problem had been their failure to comprehend rather than their deliberate cruelty. "Michael," I said gently, "I love you. You're my son, and that will never change. But I can't come back to a situation where I'm expected to apologize for standing up for myself. I can't build a relationship with people who think the problem is my refusal to accept mistreatment. So that's it? You're just going to cut us out of your life forever?" "I'm not cutting you out. I'm protecting myself from being hurt again. If you ever decide you want a relationship based on mutual respect, my door is open. But I won't go back to being your emergency fund and your convenient babysitter while being treated like a burden." "Mom." His voice cracked slightly, and for a moment he sounded like the little boy who used to climb into my lap when he had nightmares. "I mean it, Michael. If you ever want to have a real conversation about rebuilding our relationship, if you ever want to acknowledge what happened and work toward something better, I'm here. But I won't accept crumbs anymore. I deserve better than that." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and thought about the conversation. Part of me wanted to hope that Michael would choose to rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. But a bigger part of me was at peace with the possibility that he wouldn't. I'd learned something profound over the past year. You can't make people love you the way you deserve to be loved. You can't convince someone to treat you with respect if they're determined to see you as less worthy than they are. All you can do is love yourself enough to walk away from relationships that diminish you, and trust that the right people will appreciate what you have to offer. October brought an early snowfall and an unexpected visitor. I was coming home from the grocery store when I saw a familiar figure sitting on my building's front steps. But it wasn't Michael or Sarah this time. It was Tommy, now 9 years old and somehow looking both bigger and smaller than when I'd seen him last. "Tommy, what are you doing here, sweetheart?" "Hi, Grandma Ellie. I came to see you. Does your dad know where you are?" He shook his head, and I felt the familiar clench of concern mixed with love. "Come upstairs while I call him." But when I called Michael's number, it went straight to voicemail. I tried Sarah's phone with the same result. "Tommy, where are your parents?" "Dad's at work, and Mom went to her sister's house in Milwaukee. I was supposed to go to after-school care, but I came here instead." "Honey, how did you get here?" "I took 2 buses. I remembered which ones from when I came before." A 9-year-old navigating Chicago's public transportation system alone to visit his grandmother. The thought filled me with equal parts pride at his resourcefulness and terror at all the things that could have gone wrong. I made Tommy a snack and kept trying to reach Michael while we waited. Finally, around 5 o'clock, he called back. "Mom? I got like 10 voicemails from you. What's wrong? Tommy's here. He took the bus from school because he wanted to see me. Jesus Christ. We've been looking everywhere. The school called when he didn't show up for aftercare, and we didn't know what to think. He's safe, Michael. But we need to talk about why he keeps running away to come see me. He doesn't run away. He misses you. Then maybe you should let him see me more often. There was a pause, and I could hear muffled conversation in the background. Sarah must have returned from her sister's house. Can we come get him? Of course. But Michael, I want to spend some time with him first. We need to talk. After I hung up, Tommy and I sat on the couch together, and I asked him about school, about his friends, about how things were at home. Are Mom and Dad still fighting a lot? Sometimes. They don't fight about you anymore, though. What do they fight about? Money, mostly. And Mom says Dad doesn't help enough with me and Jake. I could picture it, the same patterns of resentment and blame that had poisoned their relationship with me now turning inward, creating tension in their marriage. Tommy, I want you to know something important. None of the problems between your parents and me are your fault, okay? And even though we don't see each other very often anymore, I think about you and Jake every single day. I know, Grandma. I told Jake you still love us even if Mom says you don't. Your mom says I don't love you. Tommy nodded solemnly. She says you got mad at our family and decided you didn't want to be our grandma anymore. The cruelty of turning children against their grandmother by claiming she'd stopped loving them was breathtaking. But I kept my voice calm and gentle. Tommy, that's not true. I will always be your grandma, and I will always love you. Sometimes adults have disagreements that make it hard for families to spend time together, but that doesn't change love. Then why can't you just say sorry so we can see you again? From the mouth of a 9-year-old, the logic seemed unassailable. Why couldn't I just apologize, swallow my pride, go back to the way things were? Children don't understand concepts like emotional abuse or toxic family dynamics. They just want their grandmother back. Tommy, sometimes saying sorry when you haven't done anything wrong makes things worse, not better. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to protect yourself so you can stay healthy and strong. Are you healthy and strong? I looked at this beautiful child, this piece of my heart walking around in the world, and I realized the answer was yes. I am. I'm healthier and stronger than I've been in years. When Michael arrived to pick up Tommy, he looked tired and stressed. Sarah stayed in the car, which was probably for the best given the restraining order. Mom, we can't keep doing this. Tommy can't keep leaving school to come see you. Then bring him for regular visits. Work out a schedule. Let me be his grandmother without all the drama and manipulation. It's not that simple. Sarah has a restraining order against her for identity theft and harassment. Sarah's opinions about my relationship with my grandchildren are irrelevant. She's my wife, Mom. She's their mother. She's also someone who stole my identity to post lies about me on social media. She's someone who tried to have me declared mentally incompetent because I joined a book club. She's someone who has made it clear that she sees me as an obstacle to be eliminated rather than a person deserving of respect. Michael looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with competing loyalties. What do you want from me, Mom? I want you to be brave enough to do what's right for your children. I want you to stop letting your wife dictate whether they can have a relationship with their grandmother. I want you to remember that you're a parent, not just a husband. And if I can't do that? Then Tommy will keep running away to see me, and eventually someone's going to get hurt. A 9-year-old shouldn't have to navigate city buses alone because his parents are too dysfunctional to arrange a simple visit. After they left, I sat in my apartment thinking about the impossible position Tommy and Jake were in, caught between parents who were using their love for me as another battleground in their dysfunctional marriage. I made a decision that night that surprised even me. I was going to fight for my grandchildren, not by surrendering to their parents' manipulation, but by showing them that their grandmother was strong enough to stand up for herself and for them. The next morning, I called Jennifer Santos. I want to explore grandparents' rights, I told her. I want to know what legal options I have for maintaining a relationship with my grandchildren. It's complicated in Illinois, she warned. Grandparents generally only have legal standing if one parent is deceased or if the parents are divorced. But given the documented harassment and the children's obvious desire to maintain contact with you, we might have some options. The legal process was slow and expensive, but I was determined to see it through. I'd spent too many years being passive, accepting whatever scraps of relationship my family was willing to offer. Now I was going to fight for what mattered most, my relationship with 2 little boys who needed to know their grandmother loved them enough to stand up for their right to see her. While the legal process moved forward, something unexpected happened. Michael started calling me. Not the desperate, manipulative calls of the past, but real conversations. He asked about my volunteer work, my book club, my painting classes. He seemed genuinely curious about the life I'd built for myself. We talked about his job, his worries about money, his concerns about the boys' school performance. Slowly, carefully, we began rebuilding a relationship based on mutual respect rather than my desperate need for approval. "Mom," he said during one of these calls, "I've been thinking about what you said, about being brave enough to do what's right for the kids. What conclusion did you come to?" I think I've been scared. Scared of Sarah's anger, scared of conflict, scared of making decisions that might rock the boat. And now? Now I think the boat's already rocking pretty hard. Maybe it's time to steer instead of just holding on." The breakthrough came in December, almost exactly a year after the fake emergency that had started this whole painful journey toward truth. Michael called and asked if Tommy and Jake could spend the weekend with me. "Sarah's visiting her parents in Naperville," he explained. "I could bring the boys Friday after school and pick them up Sunday evening." "And Sarah's okay with this?" "Sarah doesn't get to decide everything anymore. The boys miss you, and they deserve to have a relationship with their grandmother." That Friday evening, Tommy and Jake exploded into my apartment with all the energy and noise and joy I'd been missing for 13 months. They were bigger now, their faces more angular, their voices different. But their hugs felt exactly the same. We made pancakes for dinner because we could. We built a fort in the living room because it was fun. We watched movies and played games and talked about everything and nothing. But we also had some serious conversations. I told them about the book club, about my painting classes, about my trip to New York. I wanted them to see that their grandmother had a life full of interests and friendships, that she wasn't just waiting around to serve other people's needs. "Grandma Ellie," Jake said Saturday morning while we were making breakfast, "are you happy now?" The question caught me off guard with its directness and insight. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm very happy now." "Good," Tommy said matter-of-factly. "You seemed sad before, even when you were being nice to us." Children see so much more than we give them credit for. They'd recognized my sadness even when I was trying to hide it behind smiles and boundless availability. "I was sad before," I acknowledged. "Sometimes grown-ups go through difficult times and have to figure out how to be happy again." "Like when Grandpa Frank died?" "Yes, like that. But also like when people treat you badly and you have to learn how to stand up for yourself." That weekend, I got to be their grandmother without conditions, without having to earn the privilege through financial contributions or emergency babysitting. I got to love them freely and be loved in return, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When Michael came to pick them up Sunday evening, he lingered for a few minutes after the boys went downstairs to wait in the car. "Mom, I owe you an apology." "For what specifically?" "For letting things get so bad. For not standing up to Sarah when she was treating you terribly. For believing her lies about you. For thinking that keeping the peace in my marriage was more important than protecting my mother." "Michael, I appreciate you saying that. But apologies are only meaningful if they come with changed behavior." "I know. And I promise things will be different. The boys can visit you regularly, and I'll make sure Sarah understands that's not negotiable." "What changed your mind?" He was quiet for a moment, looking out my window at the lights of Chicago spreading out below us. "Honestly? Therapy. I started going after all this legal stuff started, and my therapist helped me see some patterns I didn't want to acknowledge." "What kind of patterns?" "I've been conflict avoidant my whole life. I'd rather give in to someone else's demands than deal with confrontation. It worked okay when I was a kid, but it's been a disaster as an adult." I thought about the sweet, easygoing little boy he'd been, always eager to please, never causing trouble. Those had seemed like admirable qualities then, but they'd made him vulnerable to manipulation as an adult. "Your therapist is right about the conflict avoidance. But Michael, the person you've been avoiding conflict with has been willing to destroy your mother to get what she wants. At some point, peacekeeping becomes enabling." "I know. And I can't live with that anymore." Over the following months, true to his word, Michael established a regular schedule for the boys to visit me. Every other weekend, and one evening during the week for homework help and dinner. Sarah wasn't happy about it, but she'd finally encountered a boundary Michael was willing to enforce. The relationship between Michael and me slowly healed, not back to what it had been before, but into something new and healthier. We talked honestly about what had gone wrong, about the roles we'd each played in creating such a dysfunctional dynamic. I acknowledged that my people-pleasing and boundary-less giving had contributed to the problem, and he acknowledged that his conflict avoidance had enabled Sarah's increasingly abusive behavior. As for Sarah, I barely thought about her anymore. The restraining order meant she was no longer part of my daily reality, and I discovered that without her constant presence stirring up drama and resentment, my life became remarkably peaceful. Sometimes I wondered if she'd learned anything from the legal consequences of her actions, if she'd gotten help for the anger and manipulation issues that had made her so destructive. But mostly, I didn't wonder about her at all. She'd had the opportunity to be part of a loving family, and she'd chosen cruelty instead. That was her loss and her responsibility, not mine. By the time spring returned to Chicago, I felt like a completely different person than the broken woman who'd stood crying in her shower 18 months earlier. I was still Eleanor McGrath, still a widow, still a mother and grandmother. But now I was also Eleanor McGrath, the book club member, the volunteer literacy tutor, the amateur painter, the world traveler, the woman who valued herself enough to demand respect from others. Mrs. Ramirez and I started planning another trip, this time to New Orleans, where she had cousins and I had always wanted to hear authentic jazz in its birthplace. I was taking an advanced painting class and considering applying for a part-time job at a local art supply store. My life was full of possibilities instead of obligations. But the most profound change was internal. I'd learned the difference between love that nourishes and love that depletes. I discovered that setting boundaries wasn't selfish but necessary. I'd realized that being alone was better than being with people who made me feel invisible. Most importantly, I'd remembered that I was worthy of love and respect not because of what I could provide for others, but simply because I was a human being with inherent dignity. One evening in late May, as I was watering the flowers Mrs. Ramirez and I had planted in the courtyard behind our building, Tommy came running up to me with something in his hand. "Grandma Ellie, look what I made for you in art class." It was a small clay pot, painted in bright blues and yellows, slightly lopsided but absolutely perfect. "It's beautiful, Tommy. What's it for?" "It's for your paintbrushes." Mrs. Peterson said artists need special containers for their supplies. I hugged him tight, this child who saw me as an artist worthy of special containers, who understood that his grandmother had interests and talents beyond her family relationships. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll treasure it always." And I will. Not just because it came from Tommy's loving hands, but because it represents everything I thought I'd lost and everything I've found again. It's a symbol of being seen and valued for who I am, not just for what I can provide. That night, as I sat in my apartment with Tommy's pot holding my paintbrushes and jazz music playing softly in the background, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this place of peace. It had started with those 4 terrible words, "She'll be gone soon." Words that were meant to dismiss me, to reduce me to an inconvenience waiting to be resolved. But those words had also been my liberation. They'd shown me exactly how my family saw me, and they'd given me the clarity to see that I deserved better. I had been gone, in a way. The desperate, boundaryless woman who'd accepted crumbs and called them love was gone. In her place was someone stronger, happier, more at peace with herself and her choices. I was still a mother and grandmother, but I was so much more than that now. I was Eleanor McGrath, and I was finally, truly, completely myself. As I prepared for bed that night, I looked in the bathroom mirror one more time. The woman looking back at me had the same face, the same gray hair, the same wrinkles earned through 7 decades of living. But her eyes were different. They held peace where there used to be desperation, strength where there used to be fear. She looked like someone who knew her own worth. She looked like someone who had learned that the most important love story of her life was the one between her and herself. She looked like someone who had survived, and more than that, someone who had thrived. And she was beautiful. Have you ever found yourself in a situation like mine, where family members took your love for granted? Where your kindness was seen as weakness, and your boundaries were treated as betrayal? Maybe you felt like you were disappearing in your own life, becoming smaller and smaller until you wondered if anyone would notice if you were really gone. I want you to know that you deserve better. You deserve love that doesn't come with conditions. You deserve respect from the people who claim to care about you. You deserve to be valued for who you are, not just for what you can provide. It's scary to stand up for yourself when you've spent years being accommodating. It's terrifying to risk losing relationships, even unhealthy ones, when you're afraid of being alone. But I promise you, the peace that comes with self-respect is worth every moment of fear you'll face getting there. Share your story in the comments below. Let others know they're not alone in this struggle. Together, we can remind each other that we all deserve to be treated with dignity and love. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own journey, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these deeply personal stories, and it helps ensure that someone else who needs to hear these words will find them. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for seeing me, not as someone's mother or grandmother or obligation, but as Eleanor McGrath, a woman worthy of love, respect, and all the beautiful possibilities life has to offer.